Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm finally going to assemble this Flames of War Soviet Reserve Artillery Battalion. This is a 100th scale or 15mm scale plastic kit suitable for mid to late war games of Flames of War. This is the second part of my Soviet God of War Artillery Battalion thing. If you want to see my video about the 76mm guns, you can click here in the upper right. The back of the box has an image of the gun crew sprue, a very brief overview of heavy artillery battalions, a photo of an assembled and painted 152mm gun, and the exploded diagram that serves as the instructions. There are no instructions included inside the box, however they can be found at flamesofwar.com and a link is in the description below. The contents of this box can make 4 122 or 4 152mm guns along with crews and command teams. Let's have a look at those contents. There are 4 of these gun sprues. As I have come to expect from Flames of War's newer plastic models, these are fairly well detailed and neatly moulded. There are of course mould lines, but for the most part they're fairly minor. Some are a little bit more obvious than others, but none are especially terrible. There are 2 guns on the sprues. This, the shorter of the 2, is the 122mm OBR 1938 gun, and this is the 152mm OBR 1943 gun. This is the one I'll be building. It does have more in the way of mould lines, but I think it's a much cooler looking gun. Also on this sprue is of course the gun carriage frame thing, and wheels, which are very helpful for moving the gun about. There are plenty of ammunition cases, both open with ammo inside ready to be taken out, put into the gun and sent to the fascists at a high velocity, and closed, which may or may not have ammo inside. There's also a gun shield, so your dudes can hide from bullets, and a table for the staff team, one on each sprue, so you will have 3 spares. Good to have in the bits box. You could use them in terrain making, buildings for example. There are also 4 of these artillery crew sprues, obviously to go with the 4 guns. The mould lines on these aren't too bad, but because they're people and have lots of curves and aren't nice and straight like the guns, they'll be a bit harder and more time consuming to clean up. They are still pretty neatly moulded and fairly nicely detailed, though I wouldn't call them extremely well detailed, but well, they are 15mm scale dudes, and for that they're fairly good. You get 6 artillery crew on each of these sprues, in case that wasn't obvious. You only need 5 figures per gun, so you do get enough to have a little bit of variety in your bases. There is also this staff team, which is made of some kind of soft polyester resin stuff. These aren't too bad looking, though they are a tiny bit worse than the plastic artillery crews in my opinion, especially the faces. They're a bit derpy, and from experience they're a little bit more tricky to clean up and attach. The same statements can and will be made about the HQ and OP teams that are included. I would much prefer all of the figures in this box to be plastic. These polyester resin ones aren't much better, if at all, than metal ones, and plastic would be much easier to work with. Oh well, I guess it could be worse. You also get this baggie full of bases. These are really quite handy for mounting guns and figures too. And that's all that's in the box. Let's get to building. I started with the guns because, well, I'm pretty sure that's what everyone is most interested in. The crew are kind of just there. I'm going to be building the 152mm version because bigger gun is more strong gun for making dead or fascist pigs. I'm terrible. Sorry. The gun itself is quite neatly moulded. The mould lines are there of course, but they are easily removed. As is often the case with small-scale gun barrels, these have solid ends, so I fix this in the usual way. I drill out the end of the gun barrel, doing my best to keep the hole centered. I widen the hole with my knife until I'm satisfied with it. Our imaginary shells can now successfully exit the gun, and really it looks much better and more convincing this way. When I attach the gun to the carriage, the elevation by default is fairly level, but I want the gun to have a much steeper angle. I've seen a lot of pictures of guns like this with quite steep angles of elevation, including on the box art for this kit, and I wanted to emulate that. You could of course just glue the part on at a steep angle, but it would leave a very small contact area for the parts to bond. You could put green stuff in there to add some stability, but I figured it might be easier to just cut an angle into the bottom of the gun part like so. You should of course be careful with this. Knives are sharp and cutty. Just kind of roughly shave an angle into the part. I didn't worry too much about cutting off most of the guide tab. As long as some of it's there, it should be fine. You can't really see it that well, but there is definitely more surface area for the gun to be glued onto the frame with. This will help prevent potential breakages down the road. You could also do something with a pinning rod if you wanted. Now it is time to glue the gun shield into place. The connection points where I've applied way too much glue are fairly obvious, though a little small. It's a little less obvious where the connection points on the gun itself are, but easily figured out, or pointed out to you with colour if you look at the instructions at flamesofwar.com. The parts go together very easily. Make sure the gun shield is on nice and straight, and the gun is now ready to be glued to the carriage. But before that, we obviously need to build the carriage. This is about as simple as could be. After cleaning up the parts, glue the wheels onto the axle bits, which are obviously intended to hold the wheels. Make sure they're on nice and straight, and now your gun carrying device is ready to lug the gun into glorious battle. Gluing the gun and gun shield assembly to the frame is just about as easy as you would expect, especially if you choose not to modify the gun part for extra elevation. All you have to do is add glue and put the parts together, making sure the gun stays fairly straight on the frame. Check it from above, though you could also model it traversed a little left or right. More importantly, make sure the gun doesn't sit on the carriage with a lean to the side, otherwise it will look silly and all the other artilleries will point and laugh. I enlisted the aid of a friendly Lego man to hold the gun at an appropriate angle just so the part didn't succumb to gravity, which is a bastard sometimes, before the glue properly set. It is silly, but hey, it works. Lego is great. Here we have the 4 completed 152mm artillery pieces. Good strong Soviet artillery to crush enemy. Now to move on to the gun crews and command teams. The gun crews are plastic and not too badly detailed for 15mm scale figures. They do have a few mold lines and burrs, particularly on the heads that need to be cleaned up, which is always fun. Not really, but it is, unfortunately, an inescapable part of the hobby. It's always a good idea to trim down the burrs on the bottom of the figures too, so they sit in the bases nicely. Speaking of bases, there are of course 4 bases for the guns. I like these bases with the holes more than the old Flames of War bases that were just flat grey plastic, though there is something to be said about having the freedom to place your figures exactly where you want them. Fortunately, there is a variation in the position of the holes on most of these bases, so we do get a little bit of variety that way. Speaking of variety, there are 6 figures per sprue and we only need 5 per gun. As I scraped the mold lines off the crew figures, I also chose which figures to use on each gun crew and then I blue tacked them to the bases so they wouldn't get all mixed up. Attaching the figures to the bases is very easy. The hardest part for me is figuring out where I want to place each figure on each base. All the guns are the same size, so no need to worry about using a specific gun for each base or anything like that. Just roughly place the gun onto the base. It doesn't need to be straight at all really, or at least I don't think it does. I then spend a bunch of time fiddling around with the positions of each crew figure. I like to try and tell a story with this. I want the finished product to have some kind of appearance of life and realism. When I'm satisfied, I glue the figures into place. This is of course very easy. This is all regular plastic, so it bonds together nicely with plastic cement. There will be a 6th hole left on the base. This can be filled with the handy dandy filler parts included with the bases. This is how one of my bases turned out. It does look like you could make a little story from the image. Take the gun away and we can now apply some green stuff to the base. I went into more detail with this in my 76mm Soviet artillery video I mentioned earlier. Rather than make this video longer by more or less repeating that, you can simply click the video here and be taken to that video if you would like to see it. There's also a link in the video description and the end card of this video. All I really did was fill the gaps between the crew figures and the bases and sculpt some wheel tracks near the gun to show that it has been moved around, just to add a little extra interest to the base. Like the 76mm bases, I added some resin tree stumps from Secret Weapon, and a couple of fallen tree branches from the Flames of War Rural Basing Kit, along with some of the ammo boxes that were included with this kit. Finally, I work on the command teams. I did manage to lose most of the video of me assembling these, but it wasn't all that interesting anyway. These figures do need a little bit of cleanup, fortunately not too much really. Despite Battlefront's claims, this material doesn't quite respond the same way as plastic when you try to scrape off the mold lines. So I didn't bother spending quite the same amount of effort as I did in cleaning the plastic figures. They're not all that good looking anyway, so there's only so much that can be done by removing mold lines. The rifleman on my HQ team had a bump on his helmet that I tried to fix. Turned out there was a hole under there. Guess I could fix that with green stuff, or just claim he has been shot. Figuring how I want these to sit on the bases was similar to the crew figures. A little trial and error, then glue them on. The difference is that plastic cement won't work on these figures because they're some kind of polyester resin, so you do need to use superglue. Just to try and differentiate these from the 76mm gun battery command models, I have swapped a couple of figures between the HQ and OP teams, and given the OP team a fallen tree branch. The staff team's table is a little bit different to the one included in the 76mm gun battery kit as well. To further differentiate the reserve artillery staff team, I added one of the secret weapon tree stumps. I was tempted to have the radio man leaning up against the tree, but I figured it would make it harder to paint. And that's it. Battlefront's 15mm scale Soviet Reserve Artillery Battalion for Flames of War is now complete. I'm really happy with how these turned out. I think my extra little addition of tree stumps, branches, and green stuff wheel tracks add quite a bit of interest to these models. It's simple to do and it adds quite a bit. I quite like this kit. I think the guns look great. They look powerful and ready to lob ton after ton of death at the fascists. The gun crew figures look alright, though their faces are a little plain and maybe a little bit melty looking. The HQ, OP, and staff teams are also alright, but suffer more from that melty-faced look. As I said in the 76mm gun video, I don't think the polyester resin figures are anywhere near as good as the plastic ones. They're soft, and I think they would easily break. I would much rather they were plastic. That said, they could certainly be worse. Total build time for this kit was around an hour and 15 minutes. That may seem long considering how little there is to the guns, but carefully scraping mold lines off 20 tiny crew figures really took a good chunk of time. In the end though, it is worth spending that time because the model will look much better when it's painted if it isn't covered in little lines. Speaking of painting, I'm not sure when I will be painting this kit. I plan on painting it at the same time as the 76mm guns, so now that both platoons are finished, it's likely to happen relatively soon, maybe. I do have other projects that I want to get done first, as is always the case. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, I would love to see them in the comments section below. If you like the videos I make, it would be awesome if you clicked like, subscribed, and share the videos with anyone you think might find them helpful or interesting. If you really like what I do, please consider helping me out by supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/Herberterpaderp. A link is in the description and here in the end card on screen now. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful or interesting. Thanks for watching. Farewell.